Is our loneliness actually our way of avoiding something else that we're feeling? In my head. Hey everyone, how are you? I hope your weekend went well. Tonight we're going to talk about loneliness. I was talking with a friend and they said, have you ever done a video on loneliness? And I thought, no, not really. I've talked about some things that might contribute to loneliness, but I've never done an actual full video dedicated to loneliness. And I thought, okay, that's a good idea because we've all felt lonely and we've all had periods that we've gone through loneliness. So why does that happen? What's going on there? Let's explore it. Okay, well, privacy seems to be hard to come by tonight, so here I am. I'm going to try to get through this video quickly. The first thing that came into my mind when I thought about loneliness was personality disorders. That's kind of what typically comes to my mind anyway, but people with personality disorders have difficulty with intimacy. That's a hallmark of a personality disorder. So I thought, okay, intimacy, loneliness, they kind of go together. So I looked into the personality traits and I realized, I have a whole series here on the channel about personality traits, but there's 26 of them. I always forget 25 or 26 of them and I forget what they are sometimes. So you can check them out if you want to, and actually I'm going to link to the specific group that I'm talking about here, but I think the personality trait domain that we're talking about actually when we're talking about loneliness is detachment. And under the domain of detachment, let's see if I can get this correct, there is withdrawal, intimacy avoidance, restricted affectivity, anhedonia, suspiciousness, and depressivity. I think that's all of them. So you can see how those different personality traits would lend themselves towards feeling lonely, because the traits themselves motivate somebody to withdraw from people, to kind of step back from people. And interestingly enough, all of these traits, they show up in most of the personality disorders, at least according to the section 3 of the DSM-5, which means that you see these traits in borderline personality disorder, in avoidant personality disorder, in schizotypal personality disorder, and in obsessive compulsive personality disorder. You do not see them in narcissistic personality disorder, interestingly. Okay, well, I had to move because even though it's Sunday night and there's not really that many people out, somehow noisy things still find their way to come around me. So you can see how these personality traits of detachment would make you feel lonely because they cut you off from other people. And, some people may, I guess, purposely do these things. You may purposely withdraw, you may purposely restrict your emotions. But a lot of people, I think, depressivity, it just kind of happens. It's not something that somebody's wishing to happen. And so when you have these traits as part of your personality, you distance yourself from people and you feel lonely. You want connection with people. So if loneliness is something that keeps showing up over and over again, you may want to consider whether or not these personality traits are traits that you have, and look into what are the different ways you can work on that. Are there ways that you can start to express your emotions a little bit more, get in touch with your emotions? Are there ways that you can move towards people instead of away from people? Those may be ways to help with any kind of loneliness you're feeling. Something else that I thought about when I thought of the word loneliness was attachment issues and attachment theory. Just to quickly recap, I've talked about it before here, is when you are a child, the way that your parents raise you, typically your mother, but whoever your primary caregiver is, that influences how you attach to them. And there's 4 different ways that you can attach to them, which I'll discuss. And depending on the way you attach to them is also how you seek out relationships throughout your life. Your attachment is not set in stone. It's something you can change. I have changed my own attachment from a preoccupied anxious to a secure attachment. And so let's talk about what the 4 are very quickly. The secure attachment is what you want. It's basically that your mother was attuned to you and she provided for you, or your family, or whoever your primary people were, they provided for you. And so you attached correctly to your first relationship, I guess we could call it. And then there's also preoccupied anxious, which is something that I had for the longest time, which is where you always try to get the attention of somebody else. You're always trying to get them to notice you, pay attention to you, be around them as often as you possibly can. Then you also have dismissive avoidant, which is when you dismiss people, you avoid them, you don't take them into consideration, you don't like to get close to people. And then you have fearful avoidant, which is kind of a mixture of preoccupied anxious and dismissive avoidant. So you maybe want to get close to people, but when it starts to get too close, then you start to back away and you start to push them away, but then you want them close again, and it's like this push and pull constantly. So those are the basic attachment styles, and I didn't get into why they happen because we don't really need to here. But I think any of the insecure attachment styles, any of the ones that's not the secure one, there's a potential for loneliness, because when you're always preoccupied anxious, as I have been throughout most of my life, you always want somebody around, and people are not as available as you would like them to be. They can't be at your beck and call 24 hours, and so you always feel like you're missing out on a relationship with somebody. You feel like they're not close enough, they're not validating you enough, and you need them. You need people around all the time, and that could easily lend itself to feeling lonely because you're not getting what you feel like you need. If you are a dismissive avoidant person, you may feel lonely probably for the same reasons that we talked about with the detached personality traits, the detachment ones, meaning that you distance yourself from people, you stay away from people, and it's hard to feel like you can never have a relationship with somebody because you just don't want people around. So there's a potential for loneliness there. And then fearful avoidant, of course, there's also a potential for loneliness because you want people around. That's maybe one of the most likely culprits of feeling lonely, because you do want people around, but when they come around, you're afraid to be near them. And somebody asked me, before I started this, I asked another friend, or I told a friend that I was going to do loneliness, and they said, well, what about like feeling lonely in a crowd? I think that's kind of related. It's where you want to be connected to people, you want them to notice you, you want to have relationships, but something gets in the way, you're afraid of communicating with them. And you feel detached, and that's those detached personality traits. You feel withdrawn, you don't feel connection to your own emotions to even be able to have a connection to other people. So I think those are some ways that loneliness might manifest. Alright, before I go any further, I feel like I have to say that with those personality disorders that I mentioned before, like for example, just because it's not a part of narcissistic personality disorder doesn't mean that you can't have traits that are in the other personality disorders. I think this is something that I'm going to start repeating here on this channel, because we are so fixated on personality disorders and that you have to fit into one specific personality disorder. And I think if we focus on the traits and not so much on the disorders, we'll realize that you can have all kinds of different impairments, and that's okay, and you can have different severities of impairments. So I just wanted to put that in there. Something else about loneliness is that loneliness can just be normal. It can be perfectly normal to have a night or a week or something where you just don't feel connected to people, where you feel like you want somebody around. So that's another thing to consider. And finally, I was thinking about this, and loneliness, I think, sometimes is an avoidance strategy to avoid something else that's going on in our lives, especially if we have trouble being alone, which happens a lot with personality disorders. We have trouble just being with ourselves, with our identity. So if we're not comfortable being alone, if we don't know how to just sit with our thoughts, sit with our emotions, occupy ourselves with certain goals or things that we like to do, then we may start to seek something outside of ourselves, and that may be a person, that may be a relationship or something, in order to avoid those uncomfortable feelings that we feel when we're alone with our thoughts and we're alone with our feelings. So that's something else to think about. Is our loneliness actually our way of avoiding something else that we're feeling? I've thrown a lot out here, and I'd like to hear from you, but first I've been working on some free worksheets that I'm going to be putting up on my Patreon page. Probably I'm going to put one up tonight, which means you'll see this when this video is released, up on my Patreon page for free. It's going to be about boundaries, and then my plan is to do more worksheets, offer a few more for free, maybe a few more for my patrons only, and go from there. This is something that has just kind of come up, and I thought, like, why the hell not? It just kind of made sense to me. So if you want to go over to Patreon, check those out. There's going to be free worksheets over there, and as well as other stuff behind the scenes and whatnot you can get. If you're new here, I do mental health videos Monday through Friday, so hit subscribe and hit the bell after you hit subscribe to get notified every time I do a video. I need you to be subscribed, and I need you to be watching my videos, because I am trying so hard to make this channel successful, and anything that you can do in that vein, subscribe, comment, all that stuff helps me. So just know that you are important, and I appreciate every single one of you. I know I don't always answer everybody, but I do see you, and I appreciate you being here with me. Of course, I do want to hear from you on this, because I threw a whole bunch of different ideas out there on what loneliness could be, and I'm sure there's more possibilities for why somebody could feel lonely. So what do you think is going on when people feel lonely? When you feel lonely, what's going on for you? Share that below with the community so we can get some ideas here and get discussing it and think about our own mental health in some new ways.